palace stood tall on the edge of the kingdom, its towers rising into the sky like silent guards. Inside those halls lived a princess named Clara. She was the youngest daughter of the royal family. Sisters were admired for their grace and beauty. People spoke of them with praise, and nobles came from far away just to see them. Clara, however, felt like she did not belong among them. She looked in the mirror often and told herself she was not as pretty as her sisters. Each time she walked through the halls, she felt the eyes of others judging her. In her heart, she believed she was plain and unworthy. Clara spent much of her time alone. She walked in the gardens, sat under the tall trees, or read in the library where no one would bother her. She loved the quiet nights when she could sit in the tower and watch the stars. The stars gave her peace, but they also made her feel small and forgotten. She wanted to matter, but she did not know how. Even when servants bowed before her, she felt it was not real respect, only duty. One day, a group of visitors arrived from Earth. They were explorers, engineers, and workers who came to help the kingdom repair its starships and machines. Among them was a man named Ethan. He was not a noble or a soldier. He was an engineer, simple and skilled with his hands. Unlike many others, he did not bow too low or try to flatter anyone. He spoke in a calm way, and his eyes carried honesty. Clara first saw him in the gardens. She had gone there to escape the noise of the palace. Ethan was fixing a small machine near the fountain. She stopped at a distance and watched him work. His hands were steady, and his focus was clear. The machine gave a spark, and Ethan laughed softly at his own mistake before fixing it again. Clara found herself smiling at his simple joy. He noticed her watching and stood up. For a moment, Clara thought he would bow like the others, but he only gave a respectful nod. "Good afternoon," he said, as if speaking to any person, not a princess. Clara felt surprised. She had grown used to people treating her with stiff formality. She nodded back and replied softly, "Good afternoon." They spoke for a short while. Ethan told her he had come from Earth and that he loved fixing broken things. Clara listened, unsure of what to say, but she felt no pressure in his presence. His words were plain and real. He did not praise her family or ask her about royal matters. Instead, he asked her what she liked to do. No one had asked her that in a long time. Clara told him about the stars and the nights she spent in the tower. Ethan smiled and said he also loved the stars, because they reminded him of endless paths waiting to be explored. She felt a warmth in her chest at his words. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel invisible. As the days passed, Clara and Ethan crossed paths again. Sometimes she would walk in the gardens and find him there working. Other times, she would see him near the repair yards. Each time they spoke, she felt more at ease. He did not treat her like a princess locked in duty. He treated her like a person, someone worth knowing. Still, Clara carried her doubts. She looked at her reflection and thought of her sisters, who were praised at every gathering.
Yes.
She wondered if Ethan also saw her as plain and unworthy. She kept those thoughts hidden, but they weighed heavily on her heart. One evening, Clara stood in the tower, watching the sky darken. The stars began to shine, and she whispered to herself, "Why was I made this way? Why can I not be like them?" A voice behind her answered, "Maybe you were asking the wrong question." She turned and saw Ethan standing at the doorway. He had come quietly, perhaps searching for her. Clara felt her face warm. She asked him why he thought she had the wrong question. Ethan stepped closer and looked at the stars with her. "You compare yourself to others," he said, "but sometimes beauty is not about looking like someone else. It is about being true to who you are." Clara was silent. His words stayed in her mind, echoing like the sound of a bell. For the first time, she felt that maybe there was more to her than she believed. She did not answer, but her heart carried a small spark of hope, as the stars glowed brighter above them. The kingdom was restless. Rumors of war moved through the halls like a cold wind. Traders whispered about ships gathering on the borders. Soldiers trained harder, their faces tense. Inside the palace, the queen and king spent long hours in council, speaking with generals and advisors. The air was heavy with worry, though few spoke openly about it. Servants hurried more than before, and guards stood at their posts with sharper eyes, but no one told her much. She was expected to smile at feasts and sit quietly when visitors came. Her sisters walked proudly through the palace, admired by all, while Clara drifted in the shadows, unsure of her place. She often found herself searching for Ethan. He worked in the repair yards where broken starships and machines waited to be fixed. Clara liked to watch him from a distance at first, but soon she began walking beside him as he worked. He told her about gears, wires, and engines in a way that was simple and clear. She listened with interest, even if she did not always understand. What mattered to her was that he spoke to her without judgment. One afternoon, Clara asked him quietly, "Do you think something bad is coming?" Ethan looked at her, then nodded. "I think so. The signs are there, but fear does not stop it. Action does." His calm tone made her wonder why she felt so afraid when he did not. He was not a soldier, not a noble, yet his words carried strength. Clara lowered her eyes. "No one listens to me. Even if I see something wrong, they do not take me seriously." Ethan set down the tool in his hand and looked straight at her. "Sometimes people only see what they want. That does not mean you are wrong. It means you must keep trying until someone hears you." His words settled in her mind, firm and steady. That evening, Clara sat in the grand hall while her family dined with officials. She heard them discuss the rival empire, the one that wanted control of their colony. Her father's voice was deep and certain, while her mother's was sharp with concern. Clara listened quietly, her heart beating fast. She wanted to speak, to tell them what she had seen near the outer gates earlier that day. Strangers moving in secret, cloaks hiding their faces. But her voice felt locked inside her chest. When she finally gathered the courage, her words slipped out softly, almost lost in the noise. "I think there are spies in the palace." The room fell silent for a moment. Her sisters exchanged glances, then laughed lightly as if she had spoken nonsense. Her father waved his hand. "Do not worry yourself with such matters, Clara. These are things beyond your concern," her mother added. "You imagine too much. Leave the worries of war to us." Clara's face burned with shame. She lowered her gaze and fell silent again. The conversation moved on, leaving her behind, like always. But inside, she felt a spark of anger. She had seen what she saw, and no one could take that from her. Later that night, she went to the repair yards where Ethan worked late. She told him everything. The cloaked figures, the strange movements near the gates, and how her family dismissed her. Ethan did not laugh or doubt. He listened closely, his brow furrowed. When she finished, he nodded. "I believe you." Two simple words, yet they lifted the weight from her chest. Together, they planned what to do. Ethan suggested they look for proof, something clear enough that even the king and queen could not ignore. Clara agreed, though. Fear tugged at her heart. They searched the outer halls and quiet passages of the palace, moving carefully so no one would notice. The dim light, Clara's hands trembled, but Ethan walked beside her with steady steps. At last they found marks near a storage room, signs of a forced lock. Clara held one of the papers with shaking hands. It was proof of betrayal, proof that enemies had already placed their hand inside the palace walls. Her breath caught, but Ethan's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "You were right," he said firmly. "Now we make them listen." Clara nodded, fear still in her chest, but mixed now with something else. It was not pride, not yet, but a new strength. For the first time, she believed that perhaps she could make a difference. As they carried the evidence to the loyal generals, Clara realized she was no longer walking in the shadows. She was stepping into the light, guided by her own courage and the trust of the one person who had always believed in her. Clara stood before the generals with the papers in her hands. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. She told them about the stranger she had seen, and the hidden room filled with maps and codes. At first the generals exchanged doubtful looks, but when they read the messages and saw the marks on the crates, their expressions grew grave. They knew the truth could not be denied. Enemy had already placed spies inside the palace. The generals bowed to Clara and promised to act. Still, she noticed that most of the credit was given to Ethan for helping find the proof. Clara did not mind, but deep inside, she longed to be seen as more than the quiet princess who had stumbled into something. She wanted to be trusted, to be valued for her own courage. That night, she returned to her tower. She sat by the window, looking at the stars as she always did. But this time, she felt different. She had spoken out, and she had been right. She had not been ignored. She had made a change. The thought filled her with a strange new energy, like fire in her chest. The next day, whispers spread in the palace. People began speaking about the youngest princess, who had uncovered a plot. Servants looked at her with wide eyes, Guards nodded with quiet respect. Clara felt both shy and proud. For once she was not invisible. Ethan met her in the gardens. He smiled as he saw her, and his words were simple but strong. "You were brave," he said. Clara shook her head. "I was afraid the whole time," Ethan replied. "Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act even while afraid." His words stayed with her, warming her like the sun after rain. But trouble was far from over. Days later, soldiers caught another spy trying to escape with more messages. The rival empire was moving faster than anyone expected. The palace grew tense with plans of defense and strategy. Clara listened quietly whenever she could, but still her parents kept her at the edge of such matters. One afternoon, while walking near the eastern wing, Clara overheard two guards whispering. They spoke of a secret path under the palace, a passage not used in many years. The enemy might try to use it during an attack. Clara froze at their words. She hurried to find Ethan and told him everything. Ethan frowned. If that path is real, then the enemy could enter the palace without warning. Clara felt fear rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Then we must check it," she said. Together they went to the old records in the library. After hours of searching, Clara found a map that showed the forgotten tunnel. It led from the cliffs outside the walls straight into the palace cellar. That night they followed the map with lanterns in hand. The passage was dark and damp, filled with dust and cobwebs. Clara's hands shook as she held the light, but Ethan walked beside her, his presence steadying her steps. At last they reached the end of the tunnel, where fresh footprints marked the ground. Clara knelt and touched them. "They've already been here," she whispered. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we warned the generals again. You are the one who found this. They will have to listen." Clara's heart pounded, but she stood taller than before. She no longer felt like the silent girl hiding in the shadows. She was part of something greater now. They returned to the generals and showed them the map and the footprints. Plans were made to guard the tunnel and seal the entrance. Clara watched as her words carried weight this time. No one dismissed her. No one laughed. They listened. That evening, Ethan found her once more in the tower. She was quiet, looking at the stars. He stepped beside her and said softly, "Do you know what I see?" Clara turned to him, curious. Ethan's eyes were calm and clear. "I see someone who is stronger than she knows. I see someone who is beautiful." Clara felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken that word to her with such truth. She looked away, her cheeks warm, but her heart was filled with light. For the first time, she began to believe it might be true. The morning sky was dark with heavy clouds when the enemy ships appeared above the kingdom. Bells rang across the city, calling soldiers to their posts. People rushed to shelters, fear spreading faster than the sound of the alarms. The palace shook as the first blasts struck the outer walls. War had come at last. Clara stood at the high window of her chamber and watched the flames rise in the distance. Her heart pounded, but she did not allow herself to turn away. She had seen the signs, warned them. Now the fight was real, and her people were in danger. Down in the courtyard, soldiers hurried to their stations. Ethan was among them, his hands no longer fixing machines but carrying a weapon. Clara hurried to meet him before he left for the gates. "You should not fight," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her with steady eyes. "I am no soldier, but I cannot stand aside while others fight to protect us. We all must do our part." Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to keep him safe, but she knew his heart would not let him hide. She nodded slowly. "Then I will do my part too." The attack struck hard. Enemy troops landed beyond the walls, pushing toward the city streets. The king and queen gave orders from the war chamber, but soon the chaos spread so quickly that even their voices could not reach every corner. Clara remembered the secret tunnels she had found and realized they could be used to save the people. She rushed through the palace halls, calling to servants and guards she trusted. "Take the children, take the families, lead them through the passages beneath the palace. They will bring you to safety." At first the guards hesitated, but Clara spoke with such force that they obeyed. She guided groups of frightened families through narrow halls and hidden doors, her lantern lighting the way. Children clung to their mothers, elders leaned on younger arms, but they moved because Clara led them. She walked at the front, refusing to let fear stop her steps. Outside, the battle raged. Ethan fought beside the soldiers at the walls. He was not trained like them, but his courage gave him strength. He moved quickly, repairing weapons that broke mid-fight, helping wounded men to their feet, and standing firm when the enemy pressed harder. Those around him felt steadier because he refused to yield. Inside the palace, Clara's sisters hid behind locked doors, their beauty and grace offering no comfort to the frightened servants. Clara, who had once thought herself weak and unwanted, now stood where her family would not. She gave orders, she calmed the people, she carried water for the injured. The palace guards began to look at her as their guide, following her words without question. Hours passed, the battle pressing close. At last the enemy forced their way into the outer courtyard of the palace. Flames burned along the walls, and the cries of war filled the air. Clara knew she had only moments before the palace was overrun. She ran to the tower, where a beacon signal could be sent to the allied kingdoms nearby. The steps were steep, the stones shaking with each blast, but she climbed without pause. At the top, she pulled the lever that released the flare into the sky. A bright light burst above the clouds, a call for help seen for miles. As she turned, she found Ethan behind her, wounded but standing. His arm bled, and his breath was heavy, yet his eyes held the same steady fire. "Reinforcements will come," he said. "But we must hold until then." Clara's fear returned like a wave, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Then we will hold," she answered. Together they hurried back to the defenders in the courtyard. Clara picked up a fallen sword, her hand shaking, but she stood with the soldiers. Ethan fought beside her, his strength carrying her forward. For the first time, Clara felt the power of her own spirit. She was no longer hiding in shadows. She was leading. As night fell, word spread among the soldiers. The youngest princess had guided the people to safety. She had lit the beacon. She stood on the battlefield with them. Her courage became their strength. Though the fight was far from over, hope grew in their hearts. And through it all, Ethan never left her side. He looked at her not as a princess, not as someone plain, but as the woman who had found her true strength. His voice reached her in the storm of battle. "You are not what you think you are, Clara. You are more. You are beautiful." Clara felt tears in her eyes, but her grip on the sword grew firmer. For the first time, she believed his words were true. The night was long and filled with fire and smoke. The enemy pressed hard against the palace walls, but Clara and the defenders did not fall. She moved among the soldiers with steady steps, carrying water, giving words of courage, and lifting the spirits of those who wanted to give up. Ethan fought at her side, his strength never wavering, even as his wounds slowed him down. Together they stood like a beacon in the darkness. At last, as the first light of dawn touched the sky, horns sounded in the distance. Reinforcements had arrived. The allied kingdoms had seen the beacon Clara had sent into the night. Their ships descended from the clouds, and their soldiers poured into the battlefield. The enemy, already worn and broken from the long fight, began to retreat. Cheers rose from the walls as hope filled the hearts of the weary defenders. Clara watched as the tide of battle turned. She lowered the sword she had carried and let out a breath she had been holding for hours. Her arms ached, her body was tired, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She had faced fear and had not run. She had led her people, and she had saved them. Ethan leaned against the wall, blood on his sleeve, but a smile on his face. "We held," he said softly. Clara moved to his side and helped him stand. "We held," she repeated, her eyes shining. For a moment, they stood together in silence, the noise of battle fading behind them. When the last of the enemy fled beyond the hills, the kingdom filled with shouts of victory. Soldiers dropped to their knees in relief, and families wept with joy as they left the tunnels and returned to the open air. The palace bells rang not with warning now, but with triumph. The king and queen stepped out before their people. They praised the courage of the soldiers and the loyalty of their allies. But when they spoke of the night's victory, all eyes turned to Clara. The servants whispered her name. The guards stood taller when they saw her. The generals bowed their heads in respect. They all knew it was she who had sent the beacon, she who had guided the people to safety, and she who had stood beside them when the enemy reached the gates. For the first time in her life, Clara did not hide from their gaze. She stood with her shoulders back and her head high. The doubts that once filled her heart were gone. She no longer saw herself as the plain sister forgotten in the shadows. She was the one who had faced the storm and brought light. Later that day, as the fires were put out and the wounded cared for, Clara found herself once more in her tower. The stars would not return until night, but she looked out across the sky anyway. The city below was scarred but alive. She felt pride, not only for her people, but for herself. Ethan joined her, his arm bandaged, but his eyes strong. He stood beside her without words for a while, letting the silence speak. At last he turned to her and said, "You see it now, don't you?" Clara tilted her head. "See what?" Ethan smiled, his voice low but full of truth. "That you are more than you ever believed. That you are beautiful, Clara. Not because of a crown, not because of how you look, but because of your heart and your courage." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of joy. She had longed to hear those words, but more than that, she had longed to believe them. And now she did. She saw herself as he saw her, as her people saw her as she truly was. The days that followed were filled with rebuilding. Clara worked beside her people, not above them. She carried stone, lifted wood, and gave her hands as freely as her voice. Wherever she went, the people followed her with trust. The youngest princess was no longer a shadow. She was their hope, their future, their queen-to-be. And Ethan was always near. He did not stand behind her as a servant, nor above her as a ruler, but at her side as a friend and partner. Together they faced the dawn of a new age, one born not from fear, but from courage, and from the belief that even the quietest voice could rise and change the world. Clara looked once more at the horizon, her heart strong and free. She was not ugly, not forgotten, not weak. She was strong, she was loved, and she was beautiful.